lot of times you have the story first, and then you come up with the enemies. But this time around, our artists came up with a group of amazing, high-quality enemies, but we couldn't put them all in, so we had to figure out how we were going to organize them. So we started out with getting 4 greater fiends, who are kind of the big bosses of the game.
You may call me Alexei.
Wolf, greater fiend and ruler of storms. I am Sidonius, ruler of flame.
I am Elizabeth.
So that's how things started. Now we know who our main bosses are going to be, but we have a huge amount of high-quality enemies that have already been modeled and are ready to be put in. Now, for various reasons, we can't put every single one of those enemies in. We went in and decided what enemy was going to be in the game and which were not. Every guy on a team has enemies that he likes, that he's worked on, he doesn't want to see go. We might be out drinking one night and one of the team members will saddle up to me with a drink and he'd be acting like a door-to-door salesman. He'd be like, well, you know, that this enemy has a really cool tail attack and I just want you to know that he could be really fun in certain situations. So some enemies actually got put back in because some of the team members were so attached.
The enemies in the game, they really come at you with everything they've got. They're just filled with a desire to finish you off.
That increases the pleasure that you get when you finally defeat those enemies.
The enemy AI is responding intelligently to the battle that's going on. So the way you injure the enemy AI is going to actually influence the way they fight you. The intensity of the fighting is going to be ratcheted up because this enemy is going to feel more threatened. They're going to be desperate. You almost feel like you're playing against a human player.
The first game was basically, you got an enemy's life down to 0, now he's dead. But in this game, you can lop off limbs and then do an obliteration technique which will finish an enemy off quicker.
And one of the coolest things about the obliteration technique system is that it'll actually change up the move depending on the situation. So you might get one move for, you know, a left arm, and you might get another move for a right arm, and then a different move for you know, a decapitation or for a leg missing. So even on the same weapon and even on the same enemy, you're going to see different animations depending on what happens.
So if an enemy loses an arm or loses a leg, their AI will change accordingly, and the attacks that they do will change accordingly. If an enemy has lost an arm or a leg, you can finish them off quicker, so you have the incentive to finish the battles faster.
Very important to be able to win a fight as quickly as possible. That's what the ninja wanted to do. Get it over with very quickly so that somebody else wouldn't sneak a lucky move in or wear down the ninja or give them time for their allies to show up and assist them. So it became very, very important. One move, fight's over.
Itagaki-san has talked about a lot in interviews. There's definitely a idea in the Japanese warrior code that you know, if you're fighting a guy who's, you know, reasonably skilled, that there should be a certain amount of respect. Hayabusa, you know, respects this, and rather than letting an enemy, you know, suffer, putting them out of their misery is one way of saying, hey, I respect you, you fought well, now it's time for your soul to go on to the next plane.
Hatsumi Sensei teaches that ninjutsu is the art of 1,000 forms and infinite variations. The weapons of the ninja were as diverse as they were deadly.
The ninja would employ tools that fit into the community in a way that maybe they didn't even look like a weapon.
We've got a number of great new weapons that are making their first appearance in Ninja Gaiden 2. The goal is to make every weapon good enough that you want to play the entire game through it. And you're going to feel like you're having a unique experience each time. We have the scythe.
What this is a long, heavy, powerful weapon that Hayabusa can wield that has a very large area of effect. It has a very wide arc. This is something that is very fun to wield and it's very satisfying in terms of just being able to cut through enemies.
There are the claws.
What this basically does is turn Hayabusa into a human weapon.
He can run on walls, he can jump. Claws allow him to apply that to fighting.
All of his martial arts and all of his athletics and acrobatics are able to be used to attack the enemy.
The long bow, back in ancient times, was about 6 feet tall, which is actually taller than the people in those days. And it was a great weapon because they were everywhere, a walking staff. It didn't attract a lot of attention.
The lunar staff was a weapon that has appeared in previous games. Before, it was really just a staff. In Ninja Gaiden 2, it is a staff that has iron weights on each end that are connected with chains. And each of these iron weights have spikes, so, as you can imagine, as you're swinging this thing around, it is incredibly lethal.
The kusarigama was a very interesting weapon. On one end would be a blade on a handle sticking out, long chain, and on the end of the chain would be a weight.
The cool thing about this weapon is you can not only do cutting attacks with the sickle portion of it, but you can also do pulverizing and smashing attacks with the iron weight that's attached on the end.
And so in the heat of battle, this weight thrown at an attacker would hit, aiming at the hands, very fragile bones there holding a sword, or the face, something that would make that attacker flinch. Could you imagine the terror that the swordsman felt? And all of a sudden, here's this hit to the face. Where did that come from?
You have the tonfa. It was what the nightstick is based off. You hold them in each hand and it's swung to hit enemies. And this is really cool because it's a hitting action, not a slicing action. So when that connects with an enemy, you're going to feel that crack.
These are weapons of Okinawan origin. You hold them in both hands and swing them. They're very similar to the claws in that they're very speedy and can hit the enemy multiple times. With the tonfas, you can actually pulverize that limb into basically ground meat.
Very important to combat in ancient Japan was the Japanese sword, the katana. It was used on foot by samurai in later years. So that was the #1 weapon. And the ninja, of course, had to be very familiar defending against that sword, but also using swords themselves.
In the first game, the dragon sword was pretty much considered the default weapon and the best weapon, and if you wanted to get through the game easily, use the dragon sword.
You'll notice that the dragon sword this time around is a lot more flexible. It has a lot more moves, it can really be a signature weapon for Hayabusa, and is a great partner to all the obliteration techniques.
There was a skill of fighting with two swords at the same time, and so you can imagine how confusing that would be to an enemy who's used to seeing just one at a time.
The dual katanas were present in Ninja Gaiden Sigma, but in that game they were incomplete. It didn't have a lot of moves and there were very few things that you could do with it. This time around though, we were obviously re-envisioning it as a completely new weapon. You have obliteration techniques, and there are so many more things that you can do with this weapon, so I certainly encourage everyone to get their hands on a new dual katanas.